you gotta be around a bunch of girls. You know, if you are a person or a guy that doesn't have a bunch of females flocking to him, then you are not allowed to be around me. Therefore, what are you, like a lesser person because females aren't flocking to you? And I understand. Come here. Come. I have a secret. But this stays between you and I, okay? Promise? Promise? I've been spending way too much time analyzing Andrew Tate. And I dug myself into that rabbit hole. So now we have arrived to this point. So here's the thing, okay? So I help people become the best them they could be, okay? I am the person where you throw your brain at me and I will throw it back, like organized, clarified, do that. People tend to come to me with their secrets, okay? You know, they'll come and they'll look at me and be like, oh, is this safe with you? And I'm like, listen, it is not in my best interest to open my mouth. However, I do tend to derive things that I find as commonalities or things that I repeatedly hear, and I investigate them further. And for this one, it's like guys coming up to me and telling me, and keep in mind, these are like mature, put together, non-misogynist males. And they're like, honestly, I like Andrew Tate. Because in our current circumstances, in our current situation, there are no true men. Like masculinity as we know it is going extinct, and femininity, especially with females, is something that we are not seeing. There has been an issue. And what was really interesting is that one of my friends was telling me, he was like, if you ever track civilizations and track their demise or their fall, there's usually at the end period, like the last 50 to 100 years, there's a decay in gender norms and ideals. And once that begins to decay, that's how you know civilization, or that civilization is beginning to crumble. I'm not saying this in this video. What I am saying in this video is I have spent a lot of time researching this guy and just trying to better understand, like diving into his psyche to just get what is happening, because we are in the midst of a gender war. And if you discuss gender dynamics and what's happening at the moment, he is a name that is going to pop up. I think there are two components to it, okay? So there's him as a person, as a persona, as a quote-unquote man. And then you have the other sector to it, which is his relationship and dynamic with females. So let's start with the good, okay? The good is that dude's smart. Like, he's not an idiot. And there are some things that he preaches that are spot on. You know, that whole notion of just get the fuck up, work out, make money, you know, just do something. And even his form of emotional processing, which is something that I was shocked at, and something that him and I actually have in common, is that we like to utilize like negative experience and then to have them motivate us. So anytime that I'm feeling petty or I'm feeling like off or whatever negativity that's hit my way, whether it's rage, depression, you know, even at my lowest moments, my lowest, and my lows are low, I utilize that for the greater good and to motivate me and to push me further and for me to become the person that I am today, which is this, like, of a marketing genius as well. You know, the school and getting his peers to basically share his videos and creating this cult-like, and that notion of creating a language, and like, you know, when they're like, oh, like G's or this or that, like, it really helps resonate and create a community feel, especially when you're in this whole, like, we're all in this together, and we're all in this together to, you know, with that greater purpose of becoming that better version of ourselves and just getting our like shit together. All this influence upon people and motivating them, I think there is a good that comes out of it. And I think there is a form of good influence in that aspect, especially considering that there is a lack of, let's just say, role models within that. However, after deeply analyzing his language and also like just hearing the things that younger boys tell me about, you know, their circumstances or their perceptions or their self-esteem or their self-worth is linked to number two. Number two is the relationship and the dynamic with females. Naturally, it's like, tell me all about your parents. If you look at the dynamic within his parents, you know, the father was the breadwinner. The father was the star of the show. The father was basically the one who had enough personality for the both of them. And like the mother was more along the lines of a side character. And because of the circumstances that happened with his father and the military, basically they got into a disagreement, and then they told him that you have narcissistic personality disorder, and then they pushed him out. And there was a major payout that was supposed to come out. And then the father would say, mine is not for sale. And that, you know, that notion of pride, that notion of just, no, you're not going to buy me. But the issue with him not being bought is the fact that they didn't have any money. And so once the father passed away, the mother had to go work as a dishwasher to provide for her sons. And I feel like this is where you get to see his whole notion of like, I gotta be a man and I gotta step up. Like, this is not okay. Like, my mother is doing this job. And he says it, the first thing that he did once he, you know, was financially stable was take care of his mom and be like, you don't need to work that anymore. You don't need to do any of that anymore. Which I think is noble in its own way, but because of his negative influence upon the dynamic of females, I can't help but wonder, what if your mother was not the side character? What if your parents had a partnership in which both of them were as intellectually like matching? What if your mother had real life skills?
I guess, on male-female dynamics to a degree from my childhood. Like I remember one time my father was away at a chess tournament for a month and a half. He was away for a really long time. He was at a chess tournament, playing chess all over the country. Came back after a month and a half. Within 45 minutes, him and my mom are arguing. I think she found something in his pocket, a phone number, so I don't know what it was. Started arguing. He just walked in the house. They started arguing, and he came down to me and said, son, give me a hug. Gave him a hug. He goes, all right, see you in a few weeks. I was like, where are you going? He goes, when you're older, you'll understand. Your mother won't shut up. Walked out the door. I didn't see him again for 2 weeks. That's who he was. Like, I come home. Oh, you want to, the fuck this? Fine. That's how he was as a man, right? So I learned, I'm not saying that I'm that way, but this is my childhood, right? I saw it. But my mother,
that were able to translate into a well-paying job. What if? And all of these things keep going and going and going, because if you think about it, I'm like, I don't think this guy knows what a healthy female dynamic is with a partner of equivalent brain power, of equivalent success, of just one that truly matches him in terms of partnership. This guy doesn't know it.
My mother was quite subservient to my father. My father was certainly a disciplinarian, who's certainly the man who's in charge of the house. My mother did her job fantastically. She taught us how to read. She fed us very well. She made sure we ate good. And my dad's basic tenet was, your mother is in charge of keeping you alive. Food, go to bed on time, eat good, go to school. She's in charge of keeping you alive. But I'm in charge of teaching you how to be a man and conquer the world. So we have different roles. So she's going to keep you alive. I'm going to turn up when I turn up. I'm going to teach you some shit.
I'm going to teach you how to live.
I'm going to teach you how to live. And they're different things. So they had very clear defined roles. To this day, my mother, she's still alive. I've retired her completely. So the first thing I did when I got rich was retire my mother.
And here's the thing. When a guy starts discussing and talking about how he prefers them young, it is like red flag on red flag on red flag. Because here's the thing about really young girls. They don't know shit. Okay, especially when you have them fresh 18, 19, 20. They don't have any life experiences. So when you put them aside, a man in his 30s that is advanced, that's sharp, that's like, dude's quick, you cannot compare. the power dynamic is completely off. And I am so sensitive to power dynamic, especially within genders, because when there is an imbalance of power dynamics, and you create space for exploitation. And that is what concerns me. Beyond that, it's the whole notion of, why do you prefer them young? What is it about women that are near your age or a bit younger that could intellectually match you that triggers you? What is it about it that makes you go like, I want them young? Oh, by the way, I can move to Romania, or I'm going to move to Romania because they're not as uptight there. All of these things scream that there's something wrong, because there is something wrong. There is something seriously and fundamentally wrong. And the more I analyze and I hear the things that he says, there's so many things that I understand that resonate true, but from his experience, not from the general average norm of the everyday person or the everyday viewer, especially of young, impressionable boys. So we're gonna start with one of them. The whole notion of, you gotta be around a bunch of girls. You know, if you are a person or a guy that doesn't have a bunch of females flocking to him, then you are not allowed to be around me. Therefore, what are you, like a lesser person because females aren't flocking to you? And I understand, like, I, as a person whom is not part of that statistical norm, is someone that takes the people that they surround themselves with extremely seriously, because ultimately you become the people that you are. And once you have information or secrets, or you want to keep it tight knit, and you not only do you want to keep it tight knit, you want to make sure that it can't be infiltrated. So I understand that him going like, I do not let a male into my life that is hungry for females. I get it, because that person or that guy becomes a liability. When you are talking to younger males and you're telling them that, they start to peg their value upon how many females that they can get, rather than teaching them how to have a fundamental, how to have a structured, how to have a genuine connection with a female. And yes, I'm speaking in the whole dichotomy of male, female, but this is a generalization. Specificity is not part of this conversation for the sake of this conversation. Now you have these bunch of boys that are basically looking at females as though they are tools. Okay, they just want to up their body count, they just want to up their numbers because they feel as though that's where their value comes from, and then they peg it to that. And there's this Australian school that has, like, they evaluated the studies and they saw that, these boys are super impressionable, and beyond the fact that they are impressionable, there has been a negative effect that has been impacting other females. And this is completely unacceptable. This is not okay in any way or form. And that we are in the midst of a gender war. This is not okay what is happening at the moment. The amount of times that I see males just like basically looking at females as though they are objects, and females looking at males as though they're object, but is truly the answer to males viewing females as pleasure objects. The response to that are females looking at males as ATM machines? Because this is where we're coming at, right? There's this dysfunction on this dysfunction, and a lot of it is linked back to that structure of like, there's something seriously wrong, but now we're going back and we have this influencer, because he is an influencer at the end of the day with major influence and a cult-like following that are listening to him, but they are listening to someone that is highly successful in his own way. He could be more successful, just saying. And influential, and taking the advice based on his life, and his life that's a life that only 5% of the world abide by. His life isn't quote unquote attainable to everyone. You could argue otherwise, that whole form of breaking out of the matrix and blah, 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 and that's a whole other conversation, but let's look at the facts. So when he starts talking about like, after I work all day and I provide food, and like the least you can do is make sure that there is a meal cooked at home. It's like, yeah, that's because you can make enough money for the both of you. And beyond the fact that you can make enough money for the both of you, there's enough money for the luxuries, and the luxuries include having a housekeeper, having a cook, having a chef, having so many things that you could actually delegate. So when you come back home and you're expecting a meal from her, she can have that meal arranged because she has the space to do that. She has the resources to do that. But now let's talk about it in terms of the reality. And the reality is we live in an economy nowadays where a single parent household does not cut it. One person cannot sustain it anymore. You have two people working. The workforce has females in it. So when you come back home and you're like, the least you could do is provide dinner, and she's just like, you do know that I work as well, right? Like, you do know that this isn't one-sided, that I want to come back home and expect dinner as well. And you see how when I see him and I study him and I understand it, it bothers me, but it doesn't, because it sheds light on what the issue is. And how there has been this like form of generalization of like, this is the way that I live my life and this is the way that you should live your life. But it's like your life is extraordinary, and for you to go about and tell ordinary people how to live their life in a way that's extraordinary, that pushes means beyond the means that they could provide, this is where things get off. And we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic. Males are disproportionately affected by it. And beyond that, females are used and abused and assaulted. There's a serious issue. Why is it that there are rates of like males that are basically like they're waking up and one day deciding to buy a firearm and going out and about and mass out of a vendetta? That is completely abnormal. And it was really interesting that there is this podcast that I was listening to with the Diary of a CEO, and in the midst of it, he was discussing how based on the structure, especially with online dating at the moment, you end up having the crème de la crème, the top tier of males, the ones with the photos, the ones with and all the females flocking there, while the rest of the male population is neglected. And going back to that dinner conversation, in the sense of, we were discussing, it's like males nowadays are afraid of females. Some are afraid of disrespecting them because they genuinely have respect for them. And other ones are just like, they're just quivering. And meanwhile, they're leaving room for whom? The obnoxious ones that come in, and then they take up all of that like space. So you have a disproportionate number of guys, a small population, that's getting the majority of female attention. Meanwhile, you have the rest, which are basically being neglected. So when I start to discuss like the different forms of programming, okay, and it's written within my theories, and I believe that there's a form of programming that is installed inside of your head. And within it, there's this, male dominant programming in which your value is pegged upon different things. And within this aspect, your value is pegged upon, if females view you as valuable, if you're receiving as many females. So they view themselves as invaluable, and so what's their solution? And considering the fact that they don't have much emotional intelligence, they end up taking it out on other females. Because psychologically speaking, females have the tendency to internalize, and males have the tendency to externalize, which is why there are more females with borderline personality disorder than males. Super interesting stuff. But going back to that point, and I really thought about it, I'm like, does this mean that this guy, should cease to exist? I'm not saying in a Godfather type of way. I'm just saying right now he is being shunned and punished by society for all the horrible, horrendous stuff that he has been spewing. And here's the thing, I just see it as such a waste, because this guy has already done the work, right? He's already amassed the following, he has the influence, he has the everything. And as I said, there's that one dynamic where things are okay. Things like, there are things which are genuinely, I cannot believe I am saying this, but respect worthy. And then there's the other aspect, which is like, who the designated you as the female ambassador, because this ain't it. And then I just read sometimes, now that he's back on Twitter, and I read some tweets, like today I read some like, vaccinated girl that wants to get with me, like, go away. And I'm like stuff like this, I'm like, gross, like gross. And when I see that, there's something so right, but there's something so wrong. And instead of, eliminating the whole thing, I can just look about it as like, if you correct your ways, if you as a person with this much impact, this much influence, correct your ways and actually go like, oh no, I've been seeing things wrong. I've never really dealt with true females that like are super intelligent, are like remarkable, are correcting my thought pattern, are doing this, are doing that. And I take back a lot of the things that I've said, and I want to work upon that and adjust it. The positive impact that could come out of that, the healing, the repair, ultimately what I see is, when I see this decay and I see it happening to such a younger generation as well, it's like you're starting them off on such a bad note. And the relationships in our lives, basically, if I ask people like, what's the quality of your life, I'm basically looking into the quality of the relationship that they have, with themselves, because that is the most important relationship that you will ever have in your life, but the relationship that you have with other people. And in a romantic sense as well. And when you look at it in a romantic sense, and if that is flawed, the fundamentals of evolution, of how we connect with one another, how we relate to one another. And let me tell you something, equal does not mean same. I think the way the world has been built is so male dominant that it does not allow for females to be respected, especially in terms of their cycle, especially in terms of their, like, we didn't ask to bring life into this world. We didn't ask to go through these ups and downs of hormonal cycles. The same hormonal cycle is not the same, but you go through ones in like 24 hours. Females go through a whole hormonal cycle through a whole month. It's not the same. But meanwhile, our world is structured in that 24-hour dynamic instead of it being structured in that month. And that already places females at a disadvantage. Other than the fact that when there's this preaching about the household and domestic, what you are doing is repeating that females are basically workers that don't deserve to be paid for their domestic labor, which they do, especially looking at the dynamic that we are at in this world. So I want to end this off by saying, there is good. And if there wasn't, then we wouldn't have reached to this level. He wouldn't be who he is today. However, the bad is so bad that it supersedes the good. The bad is so bad, the damage that that's caused is just, they're negative chain reactions that just keep happening and happening and happening. And that concerns me and that worries me. However, there is room and space for redemption, and that is the most important thing, because as I said, he's already who he is. If we tweak it, change the message, redirect it, harness this power, it could change lives. And that's what we're all about. See you on the other side.